move forward and move back. So if you have something to say, definitely say it, but then try not to dominate the conversation. So give everyone else time to speak.
Assume good intentions from the people that are speaking. We are here to contribute positive ideas that will generate good results for the working project and the community.
And then another one is one person, one mic. So everyone, make sure while someone's talking, everyone's listening and no one else is talking over the person.
Also, we can add more rules as the conversation goes on, if anyone has any propositions.
Okay, thank you both. Are there any questions at this point, or any comments anybody would like to have? Let's start here.
This might be more of a question for David, or I don't know how I would walk through with this, but it seems like, based on this presentation, most of what the metric for which like the college is identifying itself as green is based on greenhouse gas emissions, and there isn't that much of a discussion of water resources or protection of our water resources. And you talked a lot about sort of the negative aspects of biomass, but there wasn't really anything about what fracking can do for our water resources and how it could potentially contaminate water in Oberlin College. So is there any like discussion of green as like a kind of term that we're using to describe ourselves as applying to water as much as it does to greenhouse gases?
Do you want to comment, or I was going to say go ahead.
Could you repeat the question?
Okay, the question was, there's a concern that a lot of the carbon neutrality that we've been thinking about and the impact on the environment has to do with the reduction of greenhouse gases, is how we might measure ourselves as being sustainable or environmentally responsible. How are we incorporating our responsibility toward the water resources of the area and any type of impact that might have either conventional fuel production or land use practices that might impact that watershed?
Do you want us to come down?
Yeah.
Front here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that a fair paraphrasing of what you said?
Yeah. Good. I mean, specifically, it's not necessarily fracking.
Well, yeah. Well, thanks for the question. Fracking, David Roswell, you all right? Hey, I want to say before we start, there's some important people in the room. I want to acknowledge a few folks before we start. John Elder, who is a trustee emeritus at the college, has been involved in fracking issue and a lot of environmental issues here. John is down here in the front. Leo Evans at the back. Most of you know Leo, but Leo's been a major player here and responsible for a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of things that happen in this building. Jim Metzner, Jim, hold up your hand. Identified Jim Metzner earlier as the deep pulse of the planet. The true story is he is simply the program on NPR, Deep Pulse of the Planet. So, Jim, welcome to Oberlin, where everything is just love and peace. There's always sunshine and sunlight. Jane Matheson over here is the broker that handles all the traffic that comes into the president's office as the chief of staff. So if you have a problem, let me give you Jane's 24-hour hotline. That she's the one to keep speaking. Ben Jones. Ben, you all know Ben Jones, former Oberlin student of mine. I claim credit for all the good things he does and none of the things that he does that are wrong. So Ben is director of communication. So the story that we tell collectively goes through Ben's office. Terry Carlton taught chemistry here for 150 years. Well, Terry, for a long time.
No, it only seemed like it.
It only seemed like it. Terry has been a player on these issues for a lot of years too. Sean Hayes over here. Sean is the building manager for this building. And one of the issues that Sean helped us to resolve was when you put a high-tech building in place, you have a good building, but it has to be managed as a good building. And we didn't really do that for a long time until Sean arrived. And managed to cut a good bit of the energy use on this building very quickly. Now the questions about fracking. Fracking, as all of you know, and many of you are involved in this debate around here, is really contentious. It has a lot of problems. Many of you in the room know a lot more about it than I do, and John Elder certainly does, but it's been in the press. It uses huge volumes of water, as your question indicates. A fair amount of that, and the numbers that I have seen and have in reports in the briefcase right here, vary a good bit, but a lot of it comes back to the surface loaded with heavy metals and chemicals that have not been fully identified. I don't know what we do about that. What I have proposed here to some of you in the room is that we help as best we're able to develop a market in non-fracked gas. And so it would work rather like solar RECs that Rob mentioned. And you would have fracked gas and you have non-fracked gas. They would operate in different price regimes. And that market, I think, can be created. It's kind of a technical issue, but it's certainly a possible issue. For my part, I would like to see the college lead in the development of a market for non-fracked gas. Now, Rob did a superb job of painting the whole picture and the numbers and so forth, and how do we get from here to there. And David Benzing and I, David, a colleague and good friend, taught biology here for many years. Most of you have arrived since his retirement, but he is now part of the Vermilion Winery. He and 3 other partners. He's invited us all to go to the Vermilion Winery tonight before libations after this event. David and I were on 2 committees that went back into the late 90s, culminated in the College Environmental Policy, which the Committee on Environmental Sustainability is upgrading right now. So anyway, long story short, there's a history about this stuff. And there is no easy bridge to get from where we are now to where we want to be in carbon neutrality. So I don't see, and I agree with Rob on this, I don't see a way around this accepting the use of natural gas as some kind of bridge fuel. What I would like to see the college do, and all of you involved in this, would be to help to develop a market for non-fracked gas. And to the extent that fracking is going to happen, and it is going to happen, it's already happened. You can stand out here by the corner here at Highway 58, and about every 20 minutes a truck goes by with steel pipe. That's being used in fracking wells down south in the fracking zone. So it's already happened. And the issue is how it happens. And here's where state policy is really important. This will be a state regulatory issue. And so we need to put all the pressure we can on state regulatory agencies to make sure that to the extent this does happen, that it is done as well as it can be done, knowing that it will not be well done everywhere. But let's put the pressure on state agencies to do the best we can. So the summary position I've got, the question's a great question, is let's figure out how to get through this era as fast as we possibly can. Let's figure out, if we can, how to not use fracked gas. And so I would propose that you talk to students elsewhere on other campuses, and let's begin a larger movement. Let's get 25 colleges and universities and other institutions together to develop a market for non-fracked gas. Number 3, let's be political. Oakland students are really, really good at this. We need demonstrations and pressure on federal and state, well, federal government's not going to be critical agents, it's going to be state agencies on this. And so this has got, it's a complicated issue. Let's not treat it as a simple issue. It's not a yes or no issue. We're going to have to use natural gas. Let's figure out how to use it as best we're able. But thanks for the question. It's a critical issue.
And we want to use as little as possible. I mean, that's our whole goal, is to try to minimize the amount.
You mentioned the idea of creating an alternative market for non-fracked gas. So what would you respond to the argument that gas is fungible and the creation of a non-fracked gas market just creates an alternative space for fracked gas to flow into, and doesn't, and at the end of the day, create a substantive alternative that discourages fracking?
Yeah, I think it's a good issue. You know what I do about this? I think the difference in what's going on in a setting like this is we come together to reason through a complicated issue. And I've been involved in energy issues at one level or another since 1970, whatever it was, 74, 73. And this is a complicated set of issues. And it is one, there are two responses. One is that we have, as a country and as a college, I think, tended in the past to approach these things as individual issues. It can't be done that way. You've got to see this as a system. And so Rob's presentation I thought was pretty good. You saw it as a system, and you saw yourselves there in that. You all are part of this. When we did the first relamping programs, 1991-92, we got together and we relamped the student union here. And we had trustees involved in that. There were all kind of really stupid jokes that went around about how many trustees take the turn over. And energy use dropped for a little bit, and then it went back up. And we didn't understand that until we saw how much electronic stuff was being brought into the campus. And the plug loads went off, the things you plug into the walls went off the chart. And so this is a behavior change too. Bridget and Rob are working to help develop some of that. The second comment to your question is this. Rather than me give an answer to that, I think the best thing for us to do is to take this as an educational opportunity to study a really critical public policy issue. Let's come together. One of the things that can come out of meetings like this is a student policy committee that includes administration, students, staff, people, but let's reason our way through this. Any answer I give right now would be partial and probably half-baked. So take your question, which is a really good question. It's okay, how do we wrestle through, can we create a market for non-fracked gas? And how would that work? How do you keep that from being fungible or simply displacing gas from one source to another? And that's a really good issue. It's one we have to wrestle through. So rather than give an answer, let me throw the ball back to you and say, why don't we reason this together and come out with some policy alternatives that might go to the board of trustees, but let's take this as an educational opportunity as a community to do what democracies and democratic communities ought to be doing, reason through tough issues, getting all the facts we can, and coming out with a proposed solution.
And that's what the next panel will be about on November 26th. Will be public policy and natural gas issues. So come to that.
So 2 weeks from tonight.
Isn't that Thanksgiving Day?
Same place, same time.
Monday afternoon.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
One thing you didn't mention that bears on this quite a bit, well, let me back up just a moment. The geothermal exchange, the source of the energy that moves the heat is, of course, electricity. You spoke of coefficient of performance of about 3.5, but in terms of CO2, you don't break even with burning natural gas directly for heating purposes until you go above this coefficient of performance of 3. It strikes me that another thing was not mentioned at all is capital costs of these things. To heat a dormitory directly in your what do you call these area system sort of things, would be vastly less capital cost than to put the pipes in the ground and have a geothermal field. A lot of dormitories aren't air conditioned. That's the bad news. The good news is if you just heat them during the winter directly, you'll save an enormous amount of capital cost and not use that much more, marginally more, CO2 production, because the electricity is coming from something getting burned, and it's going to be increasingly natural gas, with the improvement of coal over coal. Is there any thought about in these regional groupings around the campus of not going all the way to the geothermal exchange, but being even more varied in terms of which buildings do one thing and do another?
Yeah, we have certainly, that's a great question. We have talked about that. Part of what we were looking at, and the only reason we were even considering moving toward an electric means for this in the first place is because the city was going to be providing 90% of their electricity from renewable sources. Therefore, the electricity that the college would use for any means would be reflected of that, so that 90% of the energy would come from it. Yes, using electricity for a heating purpose, even via a geo-exchange system, means that that electricity isn't available for somebody else out in another community somewhere. And that is a concern that has been brought forward. And yet, on the other hand, it depends on how the campus wants to take a look, I guess. At this point, we've been taking a look at what do we have control over in our own area to try to do something and to make the best use of that. But you're correct that if that extra electricity that we would use would be offset by, because it couldn't be used somewhere else. It would have to be created with natural gas. The only thing is, what we want to try to do to minimize that so we aren't at any difference, is we want to do this energy efficiency work so that we reduce the amount of electricity that we use, so any increase that would come on the campus by using it for heating would only fill that void that was left by the higher efficiency. So in the end, our hope is not to use any more electricity than we're using today. That we offset what we're planning to use by efficiency factors. So therefore, the system outside wouldn't realize anything different than we're doing today.
John?
I have two questions, if that's okay. First of all, on fracking, one of the great things that Oberlin College can do is because we have such an environmental presence, we can sign statements, professors and administrators can sign statements. So would any of you be willing to sign a statement calling for a moratorium or more stringent regulation? And then second of all, this is specifically for Rob. In your presentation, I only heard you mention the greenhouse gas emissions from burning natural gas. There's a study from Cornell which says that the entire life cycle emissions of natural gas, like the extraction and everything, are actually greater than that of coal. Has someone from the college run those numbers? Can you speak to whether burning natural gas is better from a point of view coal cost accounting?
Well, again, the natural gas, again, we get back to what we can control and what we can't control at this point, which certainly is what gets combusted in our boilers to create heat, which makes steam, which creates heat, heats buildings. As part of the commitment that we made to develop a plan to reach a goal of carbon neutrality by 2025, that particular protocol talks about what's combusted on the facility. I don't even know that the coal that we use takes into account all of the carbon that's emitted from digging it out of the ground, hauling it, transporting it, and other fugitive emissions, and what happens to the ash and such on the end. And I think if you took, and again, the same thing with the electricity, because then you have to go ahead and take a look at how was all the fuel derived that created the electricity, et cetera, et cetera. And if you go through all that, especially with electricity being a supplemental or kind of a secondary energy product, you use one energy product to create a secondary energy product, that means that any electricity would be extremely worse than burning any of the fuel directly itself. And taking a look at that and putting it all together, we feel that if we can try to minimize the amount that we burn and try to get through, as David said, this area as quickly as possible, is our best alternative to mitigating the amount that would be used.
I see we've got a geologist amongst us. I guess I'd like to hear his opinion about fracking, whether it's always.
I probably know less about having sat in on fracking meetings for the last 2 weeks than anybody in this room. I sat and listened to 5 of the world's leading hydrogeologists talk about the fact that there is definitely migration up here in shale. It does get up into the aquifers, and it's totally natural at this point. And I raised the question, to what extent is overpressurization cracking, which increases the surface area of the shale, so you've got higher pressure, higher surface area to get the stuff out of it. What's going to be the increase in that migration rate because of this development, not even what's happening with the wellhead? The resounding answer is we don't know. and that's a little scary. But then the world's leading expert on it got up and said, by the laws of physics, what the previous work people just said was physically impossible. So, you know, the challenge I would point out to people here, and I'm speaking as a scientist, is that if we're going to use this educational opportunity properly, we need to come into it with our opinion and do the damnedest, hardest we can do to prove ourselves wrong, because that's the only way you're going to find the truth. I'm wading through this Cornell report, and right now I could pick either side, and I could convince myself that this is absolutely supporting what I'm saying. I just before I came out, I was at the Daily Show. We were talking about the Republicans winning the election, and actually somebody from Fox News says Karl Rove, they'd already called the election for Obama, and basically they said, so is this the math the Republicans do to make yourself feel better? And so I would challenge you to not do the math that makes you feel better. The one thing that interestingly did come out in relation to the first question is of all the things, and I'm a big proponent of the fact that this is not going to be a matter of CO2, this is going to be a matter of water. But one thing I left the meeting convinced that maybe it isn't a matter of water, because there were a lot of people who, very honest people, who did good water budgets, and it turns out that the amount of water that's actually put down the hole was relatively small. And if there's one thing that I did believe, it's probably there's as much fugitive gas from traditional gas drilling as there is from fracking. So I'm not sure, and I want to say that again, I'm not sure, so I'm not stating an opinion. The frack gas, from the standpoint of fugitive emissions, is any worse than traditional gas. What I do know is, you know, we talked about doing the natural gas 4 years ago, actually close to 6 years ago, with the idea at that point that we could cut our emissions in half. And to the extent that that is true, we could miss that opportunity for that amount of time. It turns out not to be true, then we can pat ourselves on the back and say certain one type of thing. But I think in terms of if we're going to be the intellectuals that we claim we're going to be, we need to go into this as a self-education process, not start with our opinions and just basically cherry pick, you know, information that makes us feel good, that makes us convince us that we have the answer. I've been trying to figure this out for a while, and I'm no closer. I'm teaching an environmental geology course next semester, and one of my motivations is actually just to see if we can get a little closer to this answer.
John, Dave, thanks for that. It was helpful. On the question of would any of us sign a petition not to buy fracked gas, I wouldn't unless it dealt with all the issues that petition would otherwise affect. And so it's one thing for us to sit here as relatively well-to-do Americans, knowing that we're going to be in warm houses and so forth, and we can afford it. It's another thing to look at the social consequences of that were the petition to be effective in the world. So the big problem I've always had with American energy policy and our approach to it is we single out issues. We don't look at the system in the total package of it, including behavior, including the economic implications, the long-term environmental implications. And so my answer would be a contingent yes or contingent no, depending on how you read this. I'm not for fracking, and my fear is, probably shared by everybody in the room, is once you go down that road and you invest in all the fracking and you put all the money into it, and then we see the volatility of the market, we're going to find that the fracking is less out there, I suspect, and U.S. Geological Survey said this 2 years ago. There's probably less out there than we think by a large amount, maybe a third of what we currently think is available. But then you invest all the money into it, and then you end up with all the market volatility around it. So the more successful it is, the more volatile it becomes. So I don't really want to get down the road. And the best of all possible, if I go back to Rob's slide, the best of all possible worlds, you wouldn't do it. And then he pointed out all the unknowns about it. I mean, you don't do unknowns at that scale. You don't commit that kind of, I mean, smart society wouldn't do it. But I think the issue for me is don't parse the issue into a single thing. It's got a lot of other ramifications, and I think you have to acknowledge those.
In terms of behavioral reduction of energy, is there any talk about, I know in the 2 dorms I've lived in, you can't turn off the heat, like if the heat is on, it's on. I don't know anything if there are efforts being done to like make it so you can't turn off the heat, or also if there's efforts so that, you know, from say like 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. the heat wouldn't be on in the dorms, it would just be on in like mud and rather than classrooms. I don't know if that's being talked about at all.
If we can go through and we can upgrade all of the distribution systems in the building so that we can control them room by room, and then we would have digital controls and sensors in each one, we could come back to the centralized energy management position, and we could program every single room based on the schedule, based on the range of temperatures if we wanted to. All that's possible. Other colleges and universities are doing that. We need to get that level of control in our buildings, but the only way to do that is to upgrade the distribution systems, because most of them have not been upgraded since the building was built. And when you've got one building that's only got 2 thermostats in it, and the people who are closest to the boiler systems are cooking, and the people at the farthest end have space heaters plugged in, only the ones in the middle near the thermostats are the ones that are feeling comfortable, and the rest of them regulate things by opening and shutting the windows. That's not really control. So we do have the ability to do it. One other institution I worked at, we did 3 residence halls and did them over the summertime. We got no complaints from any of the users for the following 2 winters after that, and we reduced the amount of energy that was used. So it is possible. It's just going to take some capital for us to continue to do this.
Sounds like a lot of infrastructure that we're talking about, and I just don't know how to reconcile this commitment to this being a bridge and a temporary solution with the fact that what we're building now is what we're going to have. And how are we incorporating flexibility into this, and why are we making the assumption that we have to burn something? And relatedly, like, this presentation didn't convince me that geothermal isn't a viable option, so why aren't we looking more at that?
Okay. When we only have so many dollars that we have to spend, we need to try to get the most value out of the dollars to do the best things. Some of that is by reducing the amount that we use on the back end, but on the other hand, in putting together these systems, what's forcing our hand right now is the air emission regulations, which are requiring that we would probably have to put somewhere between $3 or $4 million worth of control technology onto this whole existing coal boiler plant, and then we would still be burning coal. If we can convert it to a natural gas plant, whereby we can put in the types of boilers that have the turn down, 10 to 1 turn down, we could be running them, let's say, 30,000 pounds an hour and turn them all the way down to 3,000 pounds an hour. It gives us a lot of flexibility and range with the same equipment. So we need a base to start from to continue to heat the buildings while we're doing the rest, and then we slowly ratchet that back down. We may start out where they're all at the top bunch of their use, because the way that we're looking at it now, we'd have to run all 3 boilers to meet our maximum demand. So what we do first is we do efficiency control to develop one zone, and then we take maybe the existing retrofitted boiler offline, so we only have the 2 new ones left. And we continue to work to take more of the demand out the system, so then we can only, the supplement and such would only be run from one boiler, and then the other one would just be a backup to that. And then we can work through those to even have the turn down from the maximum down all the way down to the 1. So we have our building in the flexibility to slowly bring it all the way back. Now with geothermal by itself, to meet those peak demands, you probably have to double the size of the well field. It's kind of like the old thing, is you spend 95% of your money on 5% of the solution. It's that type of thing, because you get a cost-effective chunk for about 70 to 80%, and then the other 20% probably costs you as much as the previous 80% do. And if we have to do that all over the campus, we're going to look through that first. Maybe long-term, those well fields can be expanded in the future, but at this point, that's the path that we've chosen to follow. And then the thing about it, in case any of those systems don't work, we have a reliable system sitting there that can be turned on and off, ramped up and down to supply heat to the buildings.
I guess,
Excuse me, we're ending the meeting at 9:10, so we would like to give praise to people that were on site, 3 people here, And then all the other questions, you can write them in your, the notepads that were provided, or you can email those to us. We'll provide an email at the end of the session.
Can I just follow up real quick? He didn't really answer my question. I just feel like we have this great system, we can turn it up, we can ratchet it off, on and off, it's great. And like, we're gonna get so comfortable with that. We're gonna get so comfortable on this bridge, we're not gonna have an incentive to get off it. Like, I just feel like we're gonna get so wedded to it.
Okay, so you're saying if we just build a gas plant and then we don't do anything else?
Yeah, I just don't think,
No, that's where the political will of the institution has come forward. Say, this means something to us and we're going to do it. And at this point, I don't hear anybody at the administrative or board level saying that we aren't going to do this.
Rob, to what extent are these natural gas-fired boilers, could they be used for biomass, should they become feasible?
It's difficult to convert a gas boiler. It's easier to convert a gas boiler to an oil burner than it is to convert it to a solid fuel burner. So therefore, it's a different kind of boiler to burn solid fuel than natural gas. However, boilers can be replaced. And if we got to the point where we could work on some of the energy zones and feed them with biomass instead of coming off the central plant, we could do that. And that's the beauty of doing it in phases and through zones, is that we can develop each one of these separately. And we can take advantage of other technologies as they come forward and as they become more efficient and cost effective.
So I heard you talk about fugitive emissions, and I've heard that argument in the whole life cycle emissions. But also, when you were discussing biomass, we were discussing how far we have to come to get to the plants here. The fracking process, especially the new kind of process they use, requires an extreme number of truck trips. It's over 1,000 truck trips for the first drilling phase, plus the first frac job, up to 20 frac jobs from each well, and then you have to truck the wastewater from where it is produced into like an injection well site. And the wastewater is coming to Ohio from Texas, from West Virginia, from Pennsylvania, from all across the country. And so I can understand that like we aren't taking into consideration full life cycle emissions in coal. We aren't taking full life cycle. Why are you trying to take full life cycle emissions into biomass?
I'm just talking about getting the biomass to the campus.
Well, yeah, and that is like, you know, I guess if you're going to use that argument, then I think it completely negates it, because I would say that the hydraulic fracturing processes use way more truck trips than biomass process. I mean, I
don't think the biomass supply nationally is anywhere. It's not insubstantial at all.
No,
There's a lot of
the biggest issue is we just don't have much biomass.
Yeah, I was just wondering why.
Yeah, but no, what I'm just saying is if we had policy from northern Michigan or North Carolina, it doesn't seem like it makes sense, even just from a supply standpoint, much less the transportation.
Bill, one comment to connect your comment with Danny. I think it'd be really good to develop a factual basis so we understand as much of what we can say is really the hard evidence. And I don't think that exists. I try to keep as much as I can kind of secondary newspaper literature on fracking. But I think it would help a debate like this in this community to have a fact sheet so that we know what is, and I think the issue you're raising is what is the total net energetic cost of a BTU delivered by frac gas, and including all the truck trips, steel, everything that goes into it. And one of the questions for me is, and all of you know this, but I think that we were asked to talk about the history of this a little bit. And the start thing, in my 20 years at Oregon, 22 years, is from 1990 to the present, the data on climate destabilization has gotten worse and worse and worse. The consensus was we could go up to 560 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, that'd be cool, and then we'd stop and kind of look-see and check it out. At 395, I mean, that's really that's what the debate was in 1990. By 2012, we now know that 395 parts per million, we're seeing all hell break loose. And that's a result of emissions 30 years ago. That's what came out of our tailpipes that amplified to the extent we can say it did. The storm Sandy and so forth, and the drought in Texas and so forth. It's the sense of urgency that to me is lacking in this debate. We just came through an election campaign with Nobody mentioned it. And this is the largest issue we'll ever face. And the voltage in the line, pardon the pun, needs to be a lot greater. We need to approach this as a global emergency. And I agree that we should not, in an ideal world, we should not burn frack gas. And I worry about a natural gas bridge, because I do fear that one of the pressures is going to be, especially if hard times hit, we'll stay where we are because we couldn't afford to take the next steps. And I think Rob is right, that depends on the political will of the community. You know, we have to, all of us have to band together to make sure that this is as short a trip as we possibly can make. But I think the sense of urgency ought to go way up on this issue, given the severity. We're looking at things happening much faster. I handed David a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is hardly Greenpeace. And they say we're very close to being locked into something like a 6 to 8 degree warming. We wouldn't survive, civilization won't survive 6 to 8 degree warming. That's not going to happen. And so we're now playing with this thing, and we ought to approach this as the civilizational crisis that it is. And that means working a lot harder to think this thing through, and then we've got to act before we know all the numbers and all the facts. Anyway, you've heard all that before.
So it is 9:10, so right now we encourage everyone to to write everything down on your cards. And we are going to collect all of them. We also have a worksheet. We also have a sheet so you can sign, and if you sign it, then you will get all of the notes from this meeting and everyone's collected information and questions, so then you can everyone can read it and work towards bringing it to the next meeting and other meetings after this, so we can work further on these issues and everyone will be on the same page. So write them down and where do this? It's been circulating, so it's right there right now. If you haven't gotten it, you should get it and get your name on it and bring the cards up here, and then we will put everything together and work from there.
Thanks for being special.